Hi everyone, I'm Celine from Blue Calla Patterns and welcome to video 3 for the Winterberry Wallet. For this next step, you're going to need your main body pattern piece, your main body exterior piece, and your slip pocket lining piece. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take the slip pocket lining piece and you're going to place it over top of the main body exterior piece and make sure that all of these edges are lined up, and then clip it in place. So you're going to sew this together only along this curved edge. However, when you get to this part, you're going to stop sewing at this mark. So we're going to transfer this mark over here. So use the pattern piece as a guide and make a mark right here. Okay, so you're going to be sewing with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to start here, back stitch, follow the curve, and sew slowly here so that you're sewing a nice smooth curve. And then once you get to the line, you're going to stop and rotate, and then you're going to sew towards the outer edge and then back stitch again. Okay, so now you're going to need a pair of scissors, and we want the corner here to turn nicely, so you need to actually cut into the seam allowance, sort of like a diagonal cut, with the tip of your scissor trying to get into that little corner as close as you can without cutting any stitches. So I'm not sure if you can see that. And then because we have some curved edges, you can either trim the seam allowance or you can notch or clip into the seam allowance. I usually just trim it to 1/8 of an inch, and I still find that it gives a nice smooth edge. And then we're going to flip this to the wrong side, and we're going to press that seam allowance. So to get a nice, before you're pressing, I like to roll the seam allowance between my fingers, and that makes sure that the fabric is out all the way. And then I also like to line up these edges here, just to make sure that they're nicely aligned. So I'll just add some clips, and then I'll press the seam allowance. Now, once the seam allowance has been pressed, you're just going to top stitch along this curved edge. And then again, when you get to this corner, you stop, you rotate, and you go to the end. Okay, so now you're going to need your slip pocket back panel. That's this piece here, and it has the Decuville light on the wrong side. And you're going to place it right side up, and then place the main body also right side up, and then make sure that you're matching this curved corner. And pin or clip it in place. this. And I'm going to put one just right here. Okay, and then if you lift this, the bottom edges of that slip pocket back panel and the slip pocket lining piece, they should be lined up like this. If they're not lined up perfectly, don't worry about it, as long as you're able to sew them together. So now we're going to sew these bottom edges together all the way across. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so once these two edges are sewn together, then we're just going to baste the other edges so that everything stays together. The next thing you'll want to do is get your slip pocket tab, and my magnetic snap really grabbed onto there. Okay, and then you're going to want to measure 2 inches in. So 2 inches in from this side, that's where you're going to place the slip pocket tab. So I'm just going to use a clip, hold it in place, and then I'm just going to baste it in place along the top edge. And now we're going to need to install the other half of our magnetic snap. So in order to find the location of where we're going to install it, I find if you press really firmly, then the male part of the snap kind of makes an indentation in your fabric. So I'm just going to press firmly down. And then move that out of the way. So I don't want to install it exactly there. I want to install it about 1/4 inch of the way up, because then when you insert, if you decide to use this pocket for your phone, you'll have a little bit of, it will accommodate the thickness of your phone inside the pocket. So once I have the mark, I'll do the same thing as I did previously. And I'm going to place the washer with the center hole over top of that mark we just made, and then mark the location of the prongs. And this time I'm prepared with a sharper seam ripper. And this time, because I'm installing in fabric, so there is Decaville, so that's giving the fabric a little bit of stability. But because I'm installing in fabric this time, I'm going to be adding some freight check to these holes. Then I'm inserting the prongs of my snap into those prong holes I just made, which apparently this one is there. I don't know why it's being stubborn. Okay, so now if I look inside, so I'm only making these holes in the main body exterior. So you shouldn't be making any holes in the lining fabrics here. Okay, and then you're going to place the washer over the prongs, and then you fold in the prongs to secure. Okay, so that's what it looks like when you're done. Now, because there's fabric here, I would recommend covering the prongs with a little bit of tape. So I'm just going to add a little piece of clear tape to cover those prongs. Okay, so now this is done. So it's going to stick out a little bit like this. That's okay because, again, we want it to accommodate the thickness of a phone in this pocket. Okay, so just set this aside briefly, and then you're going to need your zipper facing piece, which I need to find. Here it is. So you need your zipper facing piece, and you want your 6-inch zipper or 8 inches of zipper tape. You'll see the zipper tape should be the same length as the zipper facing piece. And now we're going to draw a rectangle on the wrong side of the zipper facing piece. And because it's a 6-inch zipper, we want that rectangle to be 6 inches. And you're going to draw that rectangle centered. So there should be 1 inch of space here, 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 and at the top. And then I want the rectangle box, because I'm doing a number 5 zipper tape, I'm going to make the opening 1/2 inch. If you are using a number 3 dress zipper, make the box only 3/8 of an inch high. Okay? And don't worry if it's not perfect. As long as you have a decent amount of space all the way around, it will work just fine. Okay, so don't mind my rectangle. I realize that because I'm cutting away from myself under the camera that I made a very crooked rectangle. So now you're going to place the zipper facing piece so that it's aligned with these edges of your main body piece. You'll see all the edges are lined up perfectly. And then if you kind of feel inside the rectangle opening, you'll notice that it falls at the same location as that cutout in your decaville. And that's what we want, because otherwise it becomes too thick to turn your zipper facing if you have decaville in the opening of the rectangle box. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew around the rectangle box that I drew, not the crooked one, but the straight one. Now, when you're sewing around a rectangle box like this, keep your needle in the down position and it'll help you rotate at the corners. And use a shorter stitch length. Don't use a long basting stitch length. I use 3, 2.5, something like that. Now, when you get to the part where you started sewing, make sure that you backstitch. Now you're going to draw a horizontal line down the center of your rectangle box, and you don't have to draw all the way to the ends. You can stop about 1/2 inch from each end, and then you're going to draw a diagonal line going from each of the 4 corners to that center line. Oh, also one thing you want to do is just turn your piece around and make sure that you sewed inside the cutout in the decaville light. I did go into it a little bit here, but I think it won't be too bad. So now we're going to cut out along those lines that we just drew. And you're cutting through all the layers. And then you need a very sharp pair of scissors, so you want them to be kind of pointy at the end. And you're going to cut from that center line to each of the 4 corners following the diagonal lines that you drew. Now, try to get as close as you can to those corners without cutting any of the stitches, and that'll give you some nice sharp corners. Okay, so now you're going to need your iron again. And we're going to pull the zipper facing piece in through the opening that we just cut inside that rectangle box towards the wrong side. And we want to press that seam allowance along the rectangle box, but we're going to do it really slowly because we want to make sure that we're pressing those edges very nicely. So I find it helps if you dampen your fingers and sort of roll that seam allowance in between your fingers. So I do the long edges first, and then I'll work on the corners. So where I sewed too close to the decouville, it's kind of giving me a little bit of resistance. I usually take a little bit of time to do this because it really pays off if you have a really nice rectangle opening for your zipper pockets. Okay, then what I'll do is I will turn it around and I press from this side as well. So if there's a bit of puckering at your corners, usually that means you didn't cut close enough. But if they're minor, you can just sort of tug them flat and press, and they usually fix themselves. So the way that you know if you did a good job is if these edges now, if they still line up, that means you did a good job. So while it's cooling, I'm just going to use my clips to hold it in place. Now, we're going to be trimming that zipper facing a little bit later on so that it's not in our seam allowance. Okay, so we're going to set this aside just a minute. And now you're going to need that 6-inch zipper or 8 inches of zipper tape. And you have 4 zipper pocket lining pieces. So these are the main zipper pocket of the wallet, so we're not going to use those. So those are the larger pieces. What we want right now are the smaller pieces. So you're going to place one piece on your work surface, right side facing up, and then place your zipper along the top edge, also right side facing up. And I have my pull going towards the right, so the opening of the zipper is towards the right. And then I'm going to sew the zipper to the lining piece along this top edge using 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so this is sewn to the lining piece. I'm just going to flip it this way, and I want the lining piece and the seam allowance to point that way. My zipper pull is being annoying. And we're just going to press that all away from the zipper. Okay, like this. So it should look like this if you flip your zipper right side facing up. So now you're going to take your second lining piece And we're going to do exactly the same thing. You're going to place that zipper right side up over top of the lining piece right side up, and make sure these edges of the lining pieces are aligned. Pin or clip that in place, and then again you're going to sew the zipper to the lining piece at the top edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so now this is sewn to the other side of the zipper, the second lining piece. And we're just going to do the same thing. We're just going to push that seam allowance in the lining piece away from the zipper and press. Okay, so this is what we should have at this point. Now you're going to need the exterior of your wallet again. So I have my zipper pointing towards, the opening of the zipper is pointing towards the left. Now, if you've done the opposite, because that's your personal preference, that's totally fine. It really doesn't matter at this point. So I'm placing the main body. So you have your zipper is right side facing up. These lining pieces are wrong side facing up. And I'm placing the main body with the zipper centered inside this pocket, as centered as possible within the rectangle opening. Okay, so you'll want to also, I'm going to take these clips off now. So you want to make sure that the edge of the zipper facing piece is lined up with the edge here of the lining pieces. So I'm just going to use some clips to hold that all in place. And then I don't really need that one anymore. So we're going to do the same thing on this side. Just make sure everything is lined up this way. And again, we're going to use these clips to just hold it all in place. And now we're going to sew all of this together. So you're just going to sew all the way around the rectangle opening of your zipper with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the edge here. And make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. You're going to need to pull your zipper pull out of the way as you're sewing. Again, leave your needle in the down position because it helps you rotate at the corners and make nice sharp corners. Okay, so now we have everything sewn in place. I'm going to just take these off now. And I want you to flip the wallet over this way. And then you're going to take this top lining piece and you're going to fold it down. Now, do not worry if the bottom edges aren't meeting up like that. That's how it should be. We're going to be trimming anyway, so it really doesn't make much of a difference. And now you're going to sew the bottom edges together, and then we'll trim it. Okay, so these are sewn together. I'm just going to trim this bottom edge that is uneven. And then we need to sew up the sides of the zipper pocket lining pieces, but we're going to be doing a bigger seam allowance. I actually want to sew as close as possible to see the little rectangle, the triangle of fabric at the ends of the zipper here. We're going to be sewing over those and then down towards the bottom. So to do this, it'll be easier if I show you from this side. I don't need this clip here anymore. So we're going to start here, just above the triangle of fabric, and you backstitch and then you sew all the way down to the bottom, and then you backstitch again here. And then we're going to do the same thing on this side. Oop, I have a little thread here, which is bothering me. There we go. You're going to do the same thing on this side. So you're going to flip the main body away. You're going to start just above the triangle and backstitch, and then sew all the way down, all the way to the bottom, and then backstitch again. Okay, so the sides now are sewn up, and I make sure that you've backstitched at the beginning and the end, because otherwise things will come undone when we trim in this step. So I'm trimming everything except for the main body exterior. We don't want to touch that. So I am trimming the lining pieces, the zipper facing piece, and the ends of the zipper. Now, because I'm cutting the zipper, I'm actually going to heat seal the ends again, which can be a little bit tricky because I have fabric in the way. So I do that as carefully as possible. I don't want my fabric to catch on fire. You could also just use fray check, but I do find heat sealing zippers is way more effective. Okay, and I did notice a bit of my Decaville is coming off a little bit, so I'm just going to give it a little touch up. I probably hadn't fused it properly to begin with. Okay, so this is what we have so far. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put this aside for just a minute, and we're going to prepare our main zipper. So you're going to need the 7-inch zipper and your 2 zipper tabs. Now, one important thing is when you're sewing along the sides of the wallet, and I'm going to show you the wallet so you understand what I'm talking about. So when we're going to be sewing the edges here of the wallet, the zipper tab is a bit bulky, and so it can be very difficult to sew when you get to the zipper tab. So if you have a really wide foot on your sewing machine, I'm going to suggest that you make your zipper a little bit shorter than 7 inches. So I have a narrow foot, so usually I can manage. If it gets a little bit tricky, what you can also do is switch to a zipper foot when you sew along the ends in the final step. And this will make more sense when we're doing the final assembly of the wallet. But for now, if you don't have a zipper foot and your regular foot on your sewing machine is very wide, you might want to consider making the zipper a little bit narrower. It does mean that you're going to have bigger holes here at the ends, but you want to be able to actually sew the wallet without getting extremely frustrated. So I am going to double check the length of my zipper, make sure that I cut it exactly. I'm using zipper tape, so I want it to be exactly 7 inches. It's a tiny bit crooked on this end. So I'm just going to, so you want the ends to also be very, very straight. Okay. And because I cut that, I'm going to heat seal the end off camera. Okay, so now what we're going to do is press our zipper tabs. So you have one side that is 1 inch, 1.5 inches, and one side that is 2 inches. So this is the 2-inch side, 1.5 inch. So we're going to start by folding this wrong sides together in half this way. And we're going to press. Do the same for the second one. And then you're going to open that up and fold in each half towards that center crease that we just created by pressing. Fold it in one half and then the second half. And then in half again, like along the original freeze. And then you're going to open this up and insert the end of your zipper in here. So yes, I did make the zipper tab wider than the zipper tape, but that's just to make it easier to sew. And then I'm just going to use some clips to hold it in place. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the second zipper tab in the other end of the zipper. Make sure that your zipper is in all the way, because if you make it longer than 7 inches, you're really going to struggle sewing that last step. And half. Now, if you tend to have a hard time sewing these on, it's a little bit more difficult sewing on fabric zipper tabs that don't have interfacing, I find anyways. You can actually use some fabric glue and glue them on and wait till it's dried. Then you're guaranteed to not have any fabric shifting when you're sewing them on. Or you can use some wash away tape if you want. So now we're going to sew these onto the ends of the zipper, and we're going to sew along the open end of the zipper tab, about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way across. Once your zipper tabs are sewn on, you can just go ahead and trim the extra zipper tab so that it's all the same width as the zipper tape. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to start sewing all of the pieces together. So you have these last 2 lining pieces, and then you have your assembled exterior, and then you have your lining with your card slots. So, actually I saw a thread here, it's bothering me. And here. Okay. So start by placing, so I want to be really precise with this part, and I want everything nicely centered. So I'm actually going to fold this in half and mark that center at the top. And then I'm going to double check the length of my zipper again. So it's exactly 7 inches. So I'm going to make center marks at the 3.5 inch mark. And make sure if you're marking your zipper tape that you're really just marking at the very outer edges. So I'm going to place this. So right now my zipper opens this way. So this is the opening of the zipper. Lining up those center marks, and I'm just going to quickly baste that zipper. So this is right side facing up, the zipper is right side facing up. Just going to quickly baste that in place along the top edge with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So just going back to when I was talking about the length of the zipper and the space, so you see how it's quite narrow here. And so when you're going to be sewing the wallet together in the last step, if you made your zipper too long and it goes too far to the edges, you're really going to have a hard time closing up these ends here. Okay, so the zipper is attached to the lining piece with just a quick basting stitch. Now, I'm going to take the exterior of my wallet and I'm going to place it so that they are right sides together. What you want to pay attention to in this step is the direction of your pulls. So right now, both zippers open at this end. Okay, so that's what I want. Picture this flipped over, and then when the zippers are closed, they're both going to have the pulls at the same end. So I prefer them at the same end, but whatever you prefer, just pay attention to that, the direction, the opening of your zippers. So now we're just going to line these up and clip them together along the top edge. And this time, we're going to be sewing them together along this top edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you're going to make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. When you get close to your zipper pull, you're going to want to stop and open that up and push the pull out of the way so that you can continue sewing in a nice straight line. Okay, so we have the one lining piece and the exterior sewn to one side of the zipper. And I want to press both away from my zipper. So I usually start with my lining piece and then I will flip this over. So you want these two to be wrong sides together and you're pressing away from the zipper. Okay, so normally on certain zipper pouch patterns, you're going to be top stitching the seam allowance along the zipper, but we're not going to do that just yet with this pattern. So now you'll need the second lining piece, and again, I'm going to be very particular here, and I'm going to fold that in half and make a mark at the center, and then place that right side facing up, and then place this edge of the zipper. Oh, I didn't trim my... Doesn't really make a difference, but visually bothers me. Okay, so now lining up that center mark here on the zipper with the center mark on the lining piece. And again, this is just a quick basting stitch that I'm going to do with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And now that the zipper is basted to the other lining piece, I place the card slot lining piece like so, and just making sure everything is lined up nicely. And this time I'm sewing along that top edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way across, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so now these two are sewn to the other side of the zipper, and I'm going to start by pressing the lining piece away from the zipper. Now this time I've used cork, so obviously cannot press cork, so I'm not going to, but I am going to just line things up really nicely, and I'm going to use clips on the sides here just to line everything up. Now, oh, that was cool. Now, I do have to top stitch, so because I have to, normally I would just try to coordinate my thread color, but I have to make a decision here, and I'm going to use the same thread color as the natural core for my top stitching thread. So unfortunately it won't match the rest, but that's okay. And when you're doing the top stitching, you're actually going to start here at this corner right here, point right there. And then you sew across the outer edge of your zipper tab, and then you stop here. Now make sure your needle is in the down position. It'll help you turn the corners. So you're going to stop here, rotate, sew this seam allowance along the zipper. Then when you get to the edge of the zipper tab, you're going to stop and rotate again, and then sew across. And then you're going to sew along here and stop here and backstitch a little bit. Okay, so I've top stitched all the way around. This is what it looks like from the top side, and this is what it looks like from the bottom. So now you're going to open this zipper all the way. And I don't want the zipper pull to get in the way when I'm sewing here. So I actually might use a little bit of tape and hold it in place. Probably just being extra cautious, not necessary. And then what we're going to do is we're going to flip these so they are right sides together, and the two lining pieces should also be right sides together. So I'm going to move this out of the way because we don't need it just yet. So we're going to start by lining up the corners here of our lining pieces. So I'm going to do the 4 corners, and then we're going to line up the ends here at the zipper because they're actually the most important if you want to have a good result at the end. So those 2 corners together, and then the 2 rounded corners together. And I'm going to do another one here in the middle. So now I'm going to look at the ends here, and the little bits here in the seam allowance, I want those to be lined up together, and I usually fold those in so that they're facing the lining. I don't know that it matters too much. What's really, really important here is that these 2 seams here be perfectly lined up. Because otherwise, if you don't line those up, then these edges here won't meet up. I mean, it still will work, but it just looks nicer if these seams here line up perfectly. And then I'll flip it over, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side, making sure that those seams are perfectly lined up and that the seam allowance points down towards the lining. Okay, and then you're just going to pin or clip the rest of the edges together. Now, because this is the most important part right here, I'm actually going to sew on either side of the zipper before I sew the rest. That way there, I can, if I need to make some, let's say your exterior and your lining are slightly different sizes, I can adjust that as I'm sewing those later. But these two ends are the most important parts, and I want those to not shift at all while we're sewing these pieces together. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the machine now, and I'm going to just sew this part and sew this part together. Then I'm going to do all the rest. Now, one important note for your lining pieces, once we are done sewing, we're going to turn it right side out, and those are going to be tucked inside. You might want to sew, as you're going in here towards the bottom edges, you might want to use a larger seam allowance, but I'll explain that again in a little bit. First, we're just going to sew these edges together. So once you've sewn them together, just have a look, see they're still perfectly aligned. That's what we want. I'm going to do the same on this side. And again, just going to verify. That's quite good. I'm happy with that. Okay, so now we're going to sew the rest. So we're going to start at this corner here where the two lining pieces are. And our regular seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch, but I'm going to just do a tiny little bit bigger here at these bottom corners. And you're going to backstitch. And then you're going to sew up to where you've sewn at the sides of the zipper. And sometimes the lining pieces can get a little bit weird, but you can just kind of adjust them as you're sewing. So as you're getting closer to your stitching here, you're going to want to decrease that seam allowance. And you're going to want to sew again over that stitching that you did at the edges of the zipper. Okay, so it is difficult to get a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance here. If you can't do it, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Now, when I'm going to be doing my corners, I'm going to be sewing very slowly around these rounded corners, because if you rush it, you're going to get oddly shaped corners. They're not going to be nice and round. And especially try to maintain your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance here. Okay, so as I'm sewing down to the last corner of the lining, again, you're starting with your regular seam allowance and just increase a little bit more to maybe 1/2 inch. And then when you get to the bottom, backstitch. So we're not sewing this bottom edge, that's going to be left open so that we can turn the wallet. Now, if you want to sew the entire wallet a second time, you can go ahead and do that. And also at this point, before we trim our seam allowance and turn, just have a look at your corners and make sure you're happy with their shape. And if you're not, you can just undo those parts and redo them again. Just make sure when you undo stitching and redo it that you're back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, so before we turn our wallet, I'm just going to do a little trimming of the seam allowance. Now, when I trim the seam allowance, you really have to at the corners, but at the location of my slip pocket tab, I don't trim anything there. I just leave that there because I don't like, where I have a tab closure, I don't like too little of the tab itself outside of the seam allowance. I've seen a lot of tabs be ripped out easily that way. Okay, so now we get to the fun part and we get to turn our wallet right side out. And it'll be awfully wrinkly, I'm sure. So this is the tough part because of the, I could take that off now. Because of the Decaville, I just find it makes it very difficult to turn, but you do need it for, although nobody wants a floppy wallet. Let's just say your cards are going to fall out if it's floppy. So we're very nearly done. So can you imagine trying to do this and you've added extra Decaville to your card slots? Whew. I don't really have problems with my hands, but I think I would have problems turning that. Of course, I forgot to bring one of my chopsticks to poke out the corners. So I'll have to do my best without them. Okay. Take this paper off. And you're going to stick the main lining pieces in there. And then if your corners are looking like this, you got to reach in there and poke them out like this. There we go. And you should have a little hole, but very, very small. It should not be a very big hole at all. Okay. So now it's a good idea to give your wallet a really good press. All right, so make sure that you give your wallet a really good press before you insert your main body Peltex pieces in this next step. So you see my pulls are on the same side. Lift up your little tabs and press the lining. Okay, so the last thing we have to do, now make sure that you reach in here and that you place your main lining pieces so they're nice and flat. Before we do the final sewing, we're going to insert those main body Peltex pieces that we cut. So I want one to be here inside the wallet and one to be here, okay, behind the card slots. So you have to reach in there and really get it in there all the way. Okay, so now I have this one placed in there. And then this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it, and I have to lift out this lining piece, and I want to place it underneath. So it's between this lining piece and the card slots. Takes a little bit of maneuvering, but it's very doable. Okay, and now that it's in there, I'm just going to retuck these inside. They are so close to being done. I am going to have to change my thread color though, because I changed it to the cork top stitching color. Okay, so really make sure that those Peltex pieces are not here at the center where we're going to be sewing. And then make sure that you double check in there that your lining pieces are nice and smooth and flat, because when we sew it shut in this next step, we don't want our lining pieces to be all wrinkly. If you want, you can actually sort of give everything another press. Okay, that feels all right. I like pressing because it just sort of, it feels like it just sets everything in place nicely, especially if you've been moving things around. Okay, and double check, that looks good. So we're going to close this. So now the very last thing that we're going to do is we are just going to, so make sure that this is open and out of the way. You're going to sew from this edge all the way to this edge, right in the middle, in between the space here, between your card slots. So if you want to make a line with a fabric pen to follow, I find the space is fairly narrow that I just use my sewing machine's foot, the regular foot. Just I use it as a guide to sew down the middle. So you're sewing from one end to the other end, and make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so I've sewn the line in the center, and now I can close my wallet. And I'm actually going to press it so that kind of remembers this fold. It is pretty thick there at the center, so I sort of like helping it to remember that fold. And we're all done. View from the back. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I look forward to seeing all of your Winterberries.